I found the USB drive taped under Wendy Zimmerman's desk on a Tuesday afternoon, and it contained every piece of evidence I needed to prove that our HOA election had been completely rigged. My name is Nathan Ashford, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Village in Gilbert, Arizona for the past 8 years. Until 3 months ago, I thought our homeowners association was just mildly annoying the way most HOAs are. Then they held an election that would decide whether our neighborhood turned into a corporate nightmare or remained the community we all loved. The whole mess started in February 2026, when our property management company, Summit Community Services, announced that the HOA board would hold elections for 3 open positions. I had been serving on the board for 2 years as treasurer, mostly keeping my head down and making sure the bills got paid on time. Our neighborhood had about 200 homes, a decent-sized community pool, some walking trails, and generally friendly people who just wanted to live their lives without too much drama. Then Wendy Zimmerman decided to run for president. Wendy was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA Karen. She was 48 years old, drove a white Lexus SUV that she parked across 2 spaces, and had short blonde hair with the classic "I want to speak to your manager" cut. She wore athletic wear constantly, even though I had never seen her exercise, and she had a habit of calling the police on teenagers for skateboarding on the sidewalk. For the past year, Wendy had been attending every single board meeting with a leather-bound notebook where she wrote down every perceived violation she spotted in the neighborhood. Kids playing basketball past 7 p.m. Someone's trash can still visible from the street at noon on collection day. A pickup truck parked in a driveway overnight, which apparently violated some obscure rule buried in our CC&Rs. The current board president was a retired engineer named Marcus Torres, a reasonable guy in his 60s who believed in live and let live. Under his leadership, the board had focused on maintaining property values while not making everyone's life miserable. When he announced he would not seek re-election due to health issues, Wendy saw her opportunity. She was not running alone. Wendy had recruited 2 allies: Barbara Chen, a real estate agent who saw the HOA as a networking opportunity, and Thomas Ridley, a middle-aged accountant who seemed to agree with everything Wendy said. Together they campaigned on a platform of strict enforcement and property value protection, which everyone knew meant they wanted to fine people for every minor infraction they could find. Running against them were 3 current board members who wanted to continue Marcus's reasonable approach: myself, a schoolteacher named Patricia Morales, and a software engineer named David Kim. Our platform was simple: maintain the neighborhood without being tyrants about every little thing. The election was scheduled for the annual meeting on May 15th. According to our bylaws, we could vote either in person at the meeting or by mailing in proxy ballots ahead of time. Summit Community Services handled the ballot collection and counting, which was standard practice. The week before the election, I started noticing something odd. I was out jogging one morning when I saw Wendy and Barbara going door to door through the neighborhood. Nothing unusual about that, but they were specifically targeting homes where they knew the owners were elderly or rarely attended HOA meetings. I watched from across the street as Wendy spent nearly 20 minutes at old Mrs. Henderson's house, a 90-year-old widow who barely left her home anymore. Later that day, I knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door to check on her. We had always been friendly, and I sometimes helped her with yard work. "Oh, Nathan, come in," she said, shuffling to let me inside. "Can I get you some lemonade?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson. I just wanted to check in. I saw you had some visitors this morning." Her face clouded. "Oh yes, that Zimmerman woman. Very pushy, that one. She had all these papers for me to sign, said it was about the HOA election. She told me that if I signed the proxy ballot for her and her friends, they would make sure my lawn maintenance fees wouldn't go up. I have trouble with the yard, and I was worried about the costs." "Did you feel comfortable with what you signed?" I asked carefully. "Not really, dear." She was quite insistent. She stood right there in my kitchen and watched me fill out the ballot. It felt wrong somehow, but she said this was how everyone was doing it this year. That was absolutely not how it was supposed to work. Proxy solicitation was allowed under our rules, but high-pressure tactics and implied threats were not. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and told her to call me if anyone else came by making her uncomfortable. Over the next few days, I heard similar stories from at least a dozen other residents. Wendy and her team were aggressively collecting proxy ballots, often from people who would not normally vote or who did not really understand what they were signing. But technically they were not breaking any rules, just being obnoxious about it. The night before the election, I had a bad feeling in my gut. I called Patricia Morales and told her what I had been hearing. "I know," she said, sounding exhausted. "I've gotten at least 10 calls about it, but what can we do? The ballots have been submitted to Summit. We just have to hope that when people show up tomorrow night, we get enough votes to counter whatever proxies they collected." The annual meeting was held in the clubhouse next to our community pool. By 7 p.m., when the meeting was supposed to start, nearly 100 residents had shown up. That was actually a great turnout for us. Usually we were lucky to get 40 people. Wendy sat in the front row with Barbara and Thomas, all three of them looking confident. Wendy kept checking her phone and whispering to her companions. Marcus Torres called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: budget reports, maintenance updates, and community announcements. Then we reached the election portion of the evening. "All right, folks," Marcus said. "We have 6 candidates running for 3 open board positions. Before we open the floor to in-person voting, I want to note that we received 73 proxy ballots this year, which is unusually high. Those ballots are in the sealed envelope here, which was delivered by Summit Community Services this afternoon." 73 proxies was indeed unusual. In past years, we typically received maybe 20 or 30. The in-person voting took about 30 minutes. We used paper ballots, and residents could vote for up to 3 candidates. When everyone had voted, we collected the ballots in a sealed box, and Marcus called up 2 neutral volunteers to help count: a nurse named Jennifer, who had just moved in last year, and an engineer named Robert, who was not aligned with either slate of candidates. Along with Jennifer, Robert, and Marcus, Wendy insisted that she should also be present for the count as the leading candidate. I pushed back and said that if she was there, I should be too, as the other slate's leading candidate. After some back and forth, we agreed that we would all go into the back office to count: Marcus, Jennifer, Robert, Wendy, and me. The 5 of us crowded into the small office. Marcus opened the sealed envelope of proxy ballots first and spread them out on the table. "Jesus," Robert muttered. "This is a lot." The proxy ballots were on blue paper to distinguish them from the white in-person ballots. I started looking through them and immediately noticed something off. The handwriting on many of them looked similar. Not identical, but similar enough to make me suspicious. Different names were signed at the bottom, but the way the check marks were made next to the candidates' names, the slant of the signatures, certain letter formations, it all felt wrong. "Marcus, can I see that one?" I pointed to a proxy ballot that was supposedly from the Hendersons' address. He handed it to me. The signature read Dorothy Henderson, but something was not right. I had seen Mrs. Henderson's handwriting before. She had a very shaky hand to arthritis, with letters that wobbled and were difficult to read. This signature was neat and controlled. "This doesn't look like Mrs. Henderson's handwriting," I said. Wendy's face turned red. "Are you accusing someone of forgery?" "That's a serious allegation, Nathan. You're just upset because you know you're going to lose." "I'm not accusing anyone yet. I'm just saying this doesn't look right." "We don't have time to authenticate every signature," Wendy snapped. "These ballots were properly submitted to Summit before the deadline. They're valid." Marcus held up his hands. "Let's just count everything and get the results. If there are concerns about specific ballots afterward, we can address them through the proper channels." I did not like it, but I did not have much choice. We counted the in-person ballots first. Out of 96 votes cast, Nathan Ashford received 68 votes, Patricia Morales received 65 votes, David Kim received 62 votes, Wendy Zimmerman received 31 votes, Barbara Chen received 28 votes, Thomas Ridley received 26 votes. If the election had been based solely on in-person voting, my slate would have won decisively. But we still had the proxy ballots. We counted the 73 proxies. The results were striking. Wendy Zimmerman received 71 votes, Barbara Chen received 70 votes, Thomas Ridley received 69 votes, Nathan Ashford received 2 votes, Patricia Morales received 2 votes, David Kim received 1 vote. "Well, there we go," Wendy said smugly. "The proxies reflect the community's voice." I stared at the numbers. "This is statistically impossible. You're telling me that 71 out of 73 proxy voters all happen to support your entire slate?" "It's called running a good campaign," Barbara said. "It's called fraud," I shot back. The room went quiet. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Jennifer and Robert both stared at the pile of blue ballots. "That's defamation," Wendy said coldly. "I could sue you for saying that." "Then sue me. These ballots are fraudulent." We went back and forth for another 10 minutes, but ultimately Marcus said we had to accept the count as it stood. The combined totals gave Wendy, Barbara, and Thomas the 3 open seats. When we returned to the main room and announced the results, you could hear the shock ripple through the crowd. "How did that happen?" Someone called out. Everyone I talked to was voting for Nathan's group. Wendy stepped forward with a triumphant smile. "Sometimes the silent majority speaks through proxy ballots. Not everyone can attend meetings, but they still care about protecting property values. Thank you all for your support. This board will finally bring order to Meadowbrook Village." The meeting broke up with a lot of angry muttering. Patricia, David, and I stood outside the clubhouse afterward with a group of residents who were convinced something had gone wrong. "We need to challenge this," David said. "Those proxy numbers are absurd." "On what grounds?" Patricia asked. "We counted the ballots. They were there in black and white." Or blue, technically, on the grounds that half of them are probably forged, I said. The question is how we prove it. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about those proxy ballots and the similar handwriting I had noticed. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Wendy had forged ballots, but proving it would be nearly impossible. We would need the original documents, handwriting experts, and a legal process that could take months while Wendy consolidated power on the board. The next morning, I drove to the Summit Community Services office in Tempe. Summit managed about 30 different HOAs in the Phoenix metro area, operating out of a generic office building off the 101. I had been there a few times for budget meetings and knew the basic layout. I asked to speak with Daniel Price, the account manager assigned to our community. Daniel was in his 30s, generally competent but not particularly passionate about his job. He seemed surprised to see me. "Nathan, hey, congratulations on the election." "Well, sorry you didn't win." "Thanks. Listen, I have some concerns about the proxy ballots. Is there any way I could review the originals again?" He frowned. "We brought the sealed envelope to the meeting. What we delivered is everything we received. But you kept copies, right? For your records?" "We scan everything, yeah. But I can't just hand over those documents to a candidate who lost. That would be a privacy issue. What if multiple residents request to see their own ballots, to verify they were counted correctly?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I guess if they each submitted a written request, we could provide copies of their individual ballots. But that seems like a lot of work for you to organize." I spent the rest of the day calling residents who I suspected had been targeted by Wendy's proxy campaign. Mrs. Henderson agreed immediately to request a copy of her ballot from Summit. So did 8 other elderly or frequently absent homeowners. By the end of the week, I had convinced 15 people to submit written requests to Summit asking for copies of their submitted proxy ballots. Summit dragged their feet for a week before finally producing the copies. I arranged to meet each resident individually to compare the ballot Summit had on file with their actual handwriting and memory of how they voted. Mrs. Henderson was first. When I showed her the scanned copy of her ballot, her eyes went wide. "That's not my handwriting, dear. And I certainly didn't vote for those 3 people. That awful Zimmerman woman pressured me, but I put down your name and your friends' names out of spite after she left. I wasn't going to let her bully me." 5 other residents told me similar stories. Either the handwriting was wrong, or the votes recorded were not what they had actually marked, or in 2 cases they had never submitted a proxy ballot at all, despite Summit having one on file under their name. I now had evidence of fraud, but I still did not have the smoking gun. The forged ballots existed, but I needed to prove who had created them. And more importantly, I needed the real count before Summit potentially destroyed or altered any evidence. That's when I decided to take a risk that could have landed me in serious legal trouble. I knew from my previous visits that Summit's office had relatively lax security. No security guard, just a keycard system for after-hours access and a single administrative assistant who managed the front desk during business hours. I also knew from casual conversation with Daniel that their server was stored in a small room near the back of the office, and that the company was not exactly cutting edge when it came to IT security. I want to be clear, what I did next was legally questionable at best, but I felt like I had no other choice. Wendy had already held her first board meeting and immediately proposed a raft of new rules, including mandatory annual home inspections with fees for violations, restrictions on what types of vehicles could be parked in driveways, and a dramatic increase in enforcement staffing that would require raising HOA dues by 40%. On a Friday evening, I put on dark clothes and drove to Summit's office building. I parked a few blocks away and walked over around 9 p.m. when I knew the office would be closed. The building had a shared parking lot with several other businesses, and there were enough cars around that I did not look too conspicuous. The front door required a key card, which I obviously did not have. But I had noticed during previous visits that there was a side entrance near the loading area that employees sometimes propped open when they were bringing in supplies. I walked around back and found it locked, but the door was old and the frame was slightly warped. I am not proud of this, but I used a credit card to slip the latch. It took me about 3 minutes of fumbling, and I was certain someone would see me, but eventually the door clicked open. Inside, the office was dark except for some emergency lighting. I made my way through the maze of cubicles toward the back where I remembered seeing the server room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The server room door was labeled "Authorized Personnel Only" and was locked with a simple keyed lock. I had come prepared with a basic lockpick set that I had ordered online and practiced with for the past week using YouTube tutorials. It took me almost 15 minutes of fumbling in the dark hallway, but eventually I got the door open. The room was small and cramped, filled with rack-mounted servers, cables, and the hum of cooling fans. I had no idea which server contained what I needed, but I found a workstation in the corner with a monitor and keyboard. The workstation was password protected, of course, but I had been watching Daniel work during our meetings, and I had noticed that he kept a small notebook where he wrote down login information. I had seen him stash it in his desk drawer. I crept back out to the main office area and found Daniel's cubicle. His drawer was unlocked, because why would you lock your desk in your own locked office? Inside the notebook were dozens of passwords, usernames, and system notes. I found what looked like administrative credentials for their document management system. Back in the server room, I logged into the workstation using Daniel's credentials. It took me a while to navigate their filing system, but eventually I found the folder structure for HOA documents, organized by community name. Meadowbrook Village had subfolders for financial records, architectural requests, violation notices, and election materials. I clicked into the election folder and found scanned PDFs of all the proxy ballots submitted for the May 15th election. I counted them quickly. There were 37 proxy ballots in the system, 37. Not 73. I felt my hands start shaking. This was it. This was proof that someone had added 36 fake ballots between the time Summit scanned the originals and the time they delivered the sealed envelope to our meeting. I pulled out a USB drive and started copying files. I took everything from the election folder, plus any related communications I could find. There were emails between Daniel and Wendy dating back several weeks. I did not have time to read them all, but I grabbed everything. The file transfer took almost 10 minutes. Every second felt like an eternity. I kept expecting to hear a security guard or a late working employee, but the office remained silent except for the hum of the servers. When the transfer finished, I logged out, wiped down the keyboard and mouse with my shirt to remove fingerprints, and carefully made my way back out of the building. I left through the same side door I had entered and walked quickly back to my car. I did not breathe normally until I was home with the door locked behind me. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started going through the files on the USB drive. The evidence was even more damning than I had hoped. The original 37 proxy ballots showed a much more balanced distribution of votes. When I tallied them, Nathan Ashford had 22 votes. Patricia Morales had 20 votes, David Kim had 19 votes, Wendy Zimmerman had 18 votes, Barbara Chen had 16 votes, Thomas Ridley had 15 votes. Combined with the in-person votes, my slate had won decisively. But someone had created 36 additional fake ballots that overwhelmingly supported Wendy's slate. Enough to flip the election results. The emails were even more interesting. Most of the correspondence between Daniel and Wendy was routine, but there was one email chain from 2 weeks before the election that made my blood run cold. Wendy had written, "Daniel, I need you to understand how important this election is for the future of Meadowbrook Village. The current board is letting the neighborhood fall into disrepair. We need strong leadership. I'm prepared to make it worth your while to ensure the right people win. Can we meet to discuss?" Daniel's response: "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I need to be clear that Summit maintains strict ethical standards. I can't get involved in the politics of your election." Wendy's reply: "Of course I understand. I'm not asking you to do anything improper. I'm simply saying that if the election results reflect the true will of the community, and if my slate wins, we would be very appreciative of Summit's professionalism. Perhaps a generous bonus for your excellent service? Say $10,000? There were several more emails back and forth where Wendy gradually increased the bribe amount while maintaining plausible deniability in her language. Daniel's responses became less resistant over time. The smoking gun was an email from 2 days before the election. Daniel wrote, "The additional materials you provided have been processed and will be included in the sealed envelope as discussed. Please ensure the payment is made as agreed. My banking information is below." Wendy's response: "Excellent work, Daniel. The transfer will be completed this week. Meadowbrook Village appreciates your dedication to accurate vote counting." I sat back in my chair, stunned. Wendy had not just forged ballots. She had bribed our property management company employee to add the fake ballots to the official count. This was not just HOA drama anymore. This was a serious crime. I called Patricia immediately. "You need to come over right now," I said, "and bring David. I found something." An hour later, the three of us were crowded around my laptop reading through the evidence. "Holy hell," David whispered. "This is election fraud, like actual criminal election fraud." "How did you get this?" Patricia asked, looking at me carefully. I hesitated. "I need you both to understand that what I did to get this was not exactly legal. I broke into Summit's office and hacked into their server. If this goes to court, I could face charges for that." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Did you alter anything, change any files?" "No. I only copied. Everything here is original. Then we need to take this to the police," she said. "And probably a lawyer. This is way beyond HOA politics now." David nodded. "She's right. Wendy bribed someone and committed fraud to steal an election. I don't care if it's just a homeowners association, that's still illegal. I knew they were right, but I was terrified. What if the police focus on how I got the evidence instead of what the evidence shows? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Patricia said. But we can't let Wendy get away with this. Who knows what else she'll do now that she thinks she's untouchable? We spent the rest of the weekend consulting with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Gary Reynolds, and he had handled several cases in the Phoenix area. When we showed him the evidence, his eyes lit up. "This is incredible," he said. "I've dealt with a lot of HOA corruption over the years, but this is blatant. The question is whether the evidence is admissible given how you obtained it." "Will they throw it out?" I asked. "Maybe, maybe not. Arizona has some protections for whistleblowers, and this could potentially fall under that umbrella since you're exposing fraud. But to be safe, we need to build a parallel case using evidence we can obtain legally." Gary's strategy was to file a formal challenge to the election results with the HOA board first, putting Wendy on notice that we knew something was wrong. At the same time, we would submit complaints to the Arizona Corporation Commission, which regulates HOAs, and to the Gilbert Police Department. "The key is not to reveal your smoking gun evidence right away," Gary explained. "We file the challenge based on the handwriting analysis and resident testimony. That puts pressure on Wendy and Daniel. Often in situations like this, once people know they're under investigation, they make mistakes or someone flips." We filed the election challenge on Monday morning. According to our HOA bylaws, the board had to schedule a special meeting within 30 days to address any formal election challenges. Wendy's response came within 24 hours. She sent a mass email to the entire neighborhood. "Dear Meadowbrook residents, it has come to my attention that certain individuals who are upset about losing the recent election are now making baseless accusations of impropriety. Let me be absolutely clear. The election was conducted fairly and transparently according to our bylaws. Every ballot was properly submitted and counted. These accusations are nothing more than sour grapes from people who cannot accept that the community voted for change. The board will address this frivolous challenge at a special meeting, but I want to assure everyone that we will not be distracted from our mission of improving property values and enforcing community standards." The email infuriated me, but Gary told me to stay quiet for now. "Let her think she's winning," he said. "Arrogance makes people careless." Over the next 2 weeks, things got increasingly tense in the neighborhood. Wendy immediately started implementing her aggressive enforcement policies. Violation notices went out for things like grass being a quarter-inch too tall, mailboxes being the wrong shade of white, and basketball hoops being visible from the street. One family got a $500 fine because their 10-year-old daughter had drawn a hopscotch grid on their driveway with chalk. Wendy claimed it violated the provision against unapproved decorative elements. The neighborhood was in an uproar, but Wendy seemed to revel in the power. She drove around in her white Lexus with Barbara, taking photos of alleged violations and posting them in the community Facebook group with passive-aggressive comments. Meanwhile, I received a call from a detective with the Gilbert Police Department named Sarah Collins. She wanted to meet about my complaint regarding election fraud. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Ashford," Detective Collins said when we met at a coffee shop. "HOA election disputes are usually civil matters, not criminal. What makes you think this rises to the level of a crime?" "Because it involves forgery, fraud, and bribery," I said. I pulled out a folder with the handwriting comparisons and resident statements, the clean evidence that did not reveal how I had obtained the server files. She looked through it carefully. "This is concerning, but it's still circumstantial. The ballots were submitted to a private company for a private organization's internal election. Even if there was fraud, I'm not sure it meets the threshold for criminal charges. What if I told you I have evidence that the property management company employee was bribed to add fake ballots?" Her eyebrows went up. "That would change things. Do you have that evidence?" This was the moment. I had to decide whether to reveal what I had done. "I do, but I need to be honest with you about how I obtained it." I explained everything, breaking into Summit's office, accessing their server, copying the files. Detective Collins listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What you did was illegal," she finally said. "You committed breaking and entering, unauthorized access to a computer system, and potentially theft of proprietary information. I could arrest you right now." My stomach dropped. "Are you going to? Show me the evidence first." I pulled out my laptop and walked her through everything. The original ballot count, the fake ballots, the emails between Wendy and Daniel. She read carefully, occasionally asking questions. "This is solid evidence of fraud," she said, "and bribery. The problem is that it might not be admissible in court given how you obtained it." My lawyer mentioned something about whistleblower protections? Maybe. That's for the prosecutors to figure out. But here's what I can do. Now that I know a crime may have been committed, I can get a warrant for Summit's servers. If the files you showed me are actually there, then we'll have legally obtained evidence. Your illegal copy becomes irrelevant. So you're not arresting me? She gave me a slight smile. Not today. But don't leave town, and definitely don't break into any more offices. Detective Collins moved fast. Within 3 days, she had a warrant for Summit's servers and digital records. Along with officers from the Computer Crimes Unit, she executed the search warrant on a Thursday afternoon. I was not there, obviously, but David worked near Summit's office and drove by around the time of the raid. He texted me a photo of 3 police cars in the parking lot. The news spread through Meadowbrook Village like wildfire. Wendy called an emergency board meeting that evening, excluding Patricia, David, and me since we were no longer on the board. But several residents attended and reported back. Wendy had apparently opened the meeting by saying that the police investigation was a witch hunt orchestrated by disgruntled election losers, and that the board should proceed with business as usual. But you could tell she was rattled. Barbara looked like she might throw up, and Thomas kept checking his phone nervously. The next morning, I got a call from Detective Collins. We found everything, she said. The server files match what you showed me. We also found evidence that Daniel Price attempted to delete the original files yesterday afternoon, probably after Wendy tipped him off that we were investigating. Luckily, he didn't know what he was doing, and our tech guys recovered everything. So what happens now? We're building a case for the prosecutor. It looks like election fraud, forgery, bribery, and potentially conspiracy. Daniel Price is already lawyered up, but between you and me, I think he might flip on Wendy to reduce his own charges. Will I face charges for breaking into Summit's office? She paused. The prosecutor is still deciding. Your lawyer is arguing whistleblower protection, and there's an argument that you were acting to expose fraud that affected the rights of property owners in your community. It's not clear-cut, but given that you didn't destroy evidence or profit from your actions, and given that you came forward immediately, I think there's a good chance they won't charge you. That was a relief. But I would not feel safe until I had it in writing. The special meeting to address our election challenge was scheduled for the following Wednesday. The clubhouse was packed, every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The local news had even sent a reporter after getting wind of the police investigation. Wendy sat at the board table with Barbara and Thomas, all 3 looking grim. Our lawyer, Gary Reynolds, sat with Patricia, David, and me in the front row. Wendy called the meeting to order, her voice tight. We're here to address a challenge to the May 15th election results filed by Nathan Ashford, Patricia Morales, and David Kim. Before we begin, I want to state for the record that this challenge is without merit and is a transparent attempt to overturn a legitimate election. Gary stood up. If I may, Madam President, I would like to present evidence that the election was fraudulent. You may present your so-called evidence. Wendy said coldly. Gary laid out our case methodically. The handwriting analysis showing discrepancies on multiple proxy ballots. The resident testimony from people who said their ballots had been altered or submitted without their knowledge. The statistical impossibility of 71 out of 73 proxies voting for the same slate of candidates. Wendy tried to wave it all away. This is all speculation and circumstantial. The ballots were properly submitted to Summit Community Services and properly counted. Regarding Summit, Gary said, I believe you're aware that the Gilbert Police Department executed a search warrant on their offices last week as part of a criminal investigation into election fraud. The room erupted in murmurs. Wendy's face went pale. That investigation is ongoing, and I'm not at liberty to discuss it, she said. Then perhaps you can discuss the 36 proxy ballots that appear in the sealed envelope you delivered to this community, but do not appear in Summit's original scanned files. Gary pulled out a printed comparison showing the discrepancy in ballot counts. I don't know what you're talking about, Wendy said, but her voice wavered. Or perhaps you can discuss the $15,000 you transferred to Daniel Price's bank account the week of the election. Wendy stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. Actually, you do, said a voice from the back of the room. Detective Collins walked forward, her badge visible on her belt. Miss Zimmerman, I need you to come with me. The room went completely silent. Am I being arrested? Wendy asked, her voice shrill. Not at this moment, but I have some questions for you regarding an ongoing investigation, and I strongly suggest you cooperate. Wendy looked around wildly as if searching for an escape route. Barbara had her face in her hands. Thomas had gone pale. I want my lawyer, Wendy said. That's your right. But we're still going to have a conversation, either at the station or here. Your choice. Wendy grabbed her purse and walked toward the door with Detective Collins. Before leaving, she turned back to the room. This is a setup, all of it. They can't beat me fairly, so they're trying to destroy me. Then she was gone. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Marcos Torres, the former president, managed to restore order after about 10 minutes. He proposed that given the serious questions about the election's validity, the results should be suspended pending the outcome of the police investigation, and the previous board should resume their positions temporarily. The motion passed unanimously among the residents present, with Barbara and Thomas abstaining. Neither of them had the stomach to defend Wendy anymore. Over the next month, the dominoes fell quickly. Daniel Price was charged with fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. He immediately accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Wendy. His testimony revealed that Wendy had approached him with the bribery scheme and had actually forged the fake ballots herself, which Daniel then scanned into Summit's system as if they were legitimate. Wendy was charged with multiple counts of forgery, election fraud, and bribery. Barbara Chen and Thomas Ridley were questioned but not charged. It appeared they had benefited from Wendy's scheme but had not been directly involved in planning or executing it. Summit Community Services fired Daniel Price and issued a groveling apology to Meadowbrook Village. They hired an independent auditor to review all their other HOA elections to ensure nothing similar had happened elsewhere. The Arizona Corporation Commission also launched an investigation and ultimately fined Summit $25,000 for inadequate oversight and controls that allowed the fraud to occur. As for my own legal situation, the prosecutor decided not to charge me with anything related to the break-in. Gary's whistleblower argument had prevailed, and the prosecutor acknowledged that while my methods were questionable, my motives were to expose genuine fraud. I received a stern warning that I had been lucky and should never do anything like that again. In July, we held a new election using paper ballots only, with the counting done in full public view with multiple witnesses. Patricia, David, and I were elected in a landslide. The neighborhood had no appetite for Wendy-style enforcement after everything that had happened. Wendy's trial was scheduled for October 2026. Her lawyer tried to argue that HOA election fraud was not a real crime and that the charges should be dismissed, but the judge disagreed. The evidence was overwhelming, especially with Daniel Price's testimony and the recovered server files showing the exact moment the fake ballots were added to the system. In December, Wendy was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, plus restitution and probation. The judge made a point of saying that fraud was fraud, regardless of whether it involved a national election or a homeowners association. The integrity of democratic processes at every level must be protected, the judge said during sentencing. Ms. Zimmerman's actions undermined the trust and rights of her neighbors. She used forgery and bribery to seize power in her community, and those crimes merit serious consequences. Barbara Chen quietly moved out of Meadowbrook Village a month after Wendy's conviction. Thomas Ridley stayed but kept a very low profile, never attending another HOA meeting. As for Summit Community Services, they implemented new protocols for election management, including multiple layers of verification, public observation of ballot scanning, and blockchain-based tracking of ballots from submission to counting. It was probably overkill, but after the scandal they were desperate to restore their reputation. The Meadowbrook Village HOA settled into a calm routine under the new board. We rolled back all of Wendy's draconian enforcement policies, established reasonable guidelines for violations, and focused on maintaining the neighborhood without making everyone miserable. Mrs. Henderson baked me a pie to thank me for uncovering the fraud. "I knew something was wrong when that awful woman came to my door," she said. "I'm glad you proved it, dear. I still think about how close Wendy came to getting away with it. If I had not noticed the suspicious handwriting on those proxy ballots, or if I had not taken the risk of breaking into Summit's office, she would have controlled the HOA for years. Who knows what damage she could have done." I also think about the broader lesson. HOAs seem trivial to a lot of people. It's just a neighborhood association, right? Who cares? But for the people who live in those communities, the HOA makes decisions that affect their daily lives and their property values. When someone corrupts that system through fraud and bribery, it matters. It matters to the families who get hit with unjust fines, to the kids who can't play basketball in their own driveways, to the elderly residents who get pressured into signing documents they don't understand. Democracy matters at every level, from the presidency down to the local HOA. And when someone tries to steal it, they need to face consequences. One evening in late December, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset over the Arizona mountains when Patricia called. "Did you see the news?" she asked. "What news?" "Wendy is trying to appeal her conviction. Her lawyer is arguing that the evidence from the server should have been excluded because of how you obtained it." My stomach clenched. "Seriously?" "Yeah. They're basically arguing that the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine applies, and that once the police knew about your illegal break-in, anything they found through their warrant was tainted." "That's not how it works, is it?" "I don't think so, but I'm not a lawyer. I called Gary and he said the appeal is a long shot. The police had independent probable cause for their warrant based on the resident testimony and handwriting analysis. Your server hack just pointed them in the right direction. So we're okay? Should be. But it might take a few months to work through the appeals court. In March 2027, the Arizona Court of Appeals rejected Wendy's appeal in a strongly worded opinion. The court held that while my actions in accessing Summit's server were illegal, and I was fortunate not to have been prosecuted, they did not taint the subsequent police investigation because the officers had obtained a valid warrant based on independent evidence. The court also noted that the trial court had properly instructed the jury not to consider my illegal access as evidence, only the legally obtained files from the warranted search. The opinion concluded, the defendant's conviction rests on overwhelming evidence of forgery, fraud, and bribery. The method by which this fraud was initially discovered, while not condoned, does not alter the fundamental fact that the defendant engaged in serious criminal conduct to subvert a democratic election. The conviction is affirmed. That was the end of it. Wendy would serve her sentence, and Meadowbrook Village could finally move on. I continued serving on the HOA board for another 2 years before deciding I had done my time and wanted to step back. The neighborhood was in good shape, property values were stable, and we had established a culture of reasonable enforcement balanced with respect for homeowners' rights. Sometimes I still drive past Summit Community Services office building and think about that night I broke in. It was reckless and stupid, and I'm lucky I didn't end up facing criminal charges myself, but I also don't regret it. Sometimes you have to take a risk to do what's right. The USB drive with the original files is still taped under my desk drawer, even though I don't need it anymore. It's a reminder of how close we came to losing our community to someone's power-hungry schemes, and how important it is to fight back when you see corruption, even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowners association. These days, when I see the kids playing basketball in their driveways or the neighbors gathering at the pool without fear of violation notices, I feel pretty good about what we accomplished. We saved our neighborhood from a tyrant, exposed real corruption, and proved that standing up to fraud matters no matter how small the stakes might seem from the outside. And every time someone new moves into Meadowbrook Village, I make sure to tell them the story of Wendy Zimmerman and the forged ballots. Not as a cautionary tale about HOAs, but as a reminder that democracy requires eternal vigilance. Whether you're electing a president or an HOA board member, the process has to be fair and transparent. When it's not, people need to speak up even if it means doing something a little crazy to get the truth.